England is going through the biggest restructuring of local government since 1974. Over the next 2 years, almost 200 councils will merge, split, or move into new regional structures. It's not some distant future shift, it's happening right now across services that support some of the most vulnerable people in society. One council already living through this, and it's today's case studies, is Westmorland and Furness, a brand new unitary authority formed from former councils Borough Cumbria County, Eden District and South Lakeland, and it covers a genuinely huge varied area stretching from Alston in the far northeast all the way through to Walney Island in the southwest, taking in Barrow, Kendal, Penrith along the way. LGR is really shaping how local authorities operate right now. It's merging services, teams and processes, and technology has a huge part to play in whether that transition is smooth or painful. To help unpack that, I'm joined today by two great guests who sit on the opposite sides of this challenge, one helping to design the technology and solutions, and one who's lived through reorganisation on the ground. First, I'd like to introduce Mark Scott, Chief Operating Officer at System C. Mark has worked across IT in the public sector for over 20 years, specialising in IT strategy and leadership, business development, transformational change and service excellence. He's held senior roles at Canteen Business Solutions, PwC, Capita, Capgemini and Thales, with a strong record in business growth, service optimisation and building high-performing teams. Welcome to the podcast, Mark.
Hi, Roy. How you doing?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. Really good. I'm excited to dig into this and introduce my next guest, which is Paul Robinson, who led major work streams of the Cumbria LGR programme up to vesting day and then served for 3 years as Director of Enabler of Services at Westmorland and Furness Council, one of the new unitary councils created through the Cumbria Local Government Reorganisation programme. Paul led a directorate of over 450 staff covering ICT, digital, customer services, legal, HR and more, and played a pivotal role in the Cumbrian LGR's ICT workstream, safely transitioning 7 legacy ITC environments into 2, including disaggregating 3 System C supplied platforms along the way. Paul, great to have you with us. You've genuinely lived through one of the most complex ICT transformations in recent UK local government history, so I'm looking forward to this. And wow, as I read those introductions out and the scope of works that must have been undertaken by you and your respective teams, it sounds incredible. So let's jump in and really start to unpack some of this stuff. I want to look at the challenges and opportunities first of all, and let's start broad with yourself, Mark. System C's own research found that 76%, I think, of practitioners are concerned about the impact of organisational change and their ability to support people safely. I was looking at another stat as well, and 41% aren't confident safeguarding concerns will be properly identified and escalated during reorganisation. As one of your colleagues said, Chris Sweeney, I think it was, put it, the lights need to stay on. So what do you both see as the biggest challenges and opportunities that local government reorganisation presents for councils, and how can technology help make that transition smoother? Mark, start with you first.
Yeah, sure. So I think, as you said in your intro, this is a generational change, a once in a generation change that's been made across the sector. The biggest challenges are about keeping the lights on, but keeping citizens safe. You know, the services that are being delivered by the frontline through social care are around protecting the most vulnerable people in society. So it's really important that there is a focus on maintaining the stability of the system, ensuring that the records are secure, that they're able to be understood, scrutinised and transferred into the new entity with minimal low risk. So there's a confidence that, you know, that looked after child is tracked from one boundary into the other. So it's transferred into the system. There's a continuation. You know, child safeguarding and the safety of the citizens doesn't change day to day because of local government reorganisation. So we really must make sure we need to do that. And we are in 2026, and technologies, continues to make leaps. And I think having the systems there with the right governance, the right tracking inside that, understanding the tagging around the data allows us to make sure that we can prepare for the change. And I think probably that prepare is the biggest word for me. How do you get ready for this? This is coming very soon. Having that runway to really test and have confidence that your data's robust and you can continue to deliver those services is hugely important.
So how do you manage all of that as a team at System C to make sure you're keeping track of all of those different variables at all of the time to make sure you've got you've got control, you've got a purchase on them all?
So the system of record is absolutely core to our products and what we're doing there. So that day-to-day is absolutely the core of what we deliver as a service. But the key part in terms of this journey is engaging with our customers and engaging our customers in a partnership way. And that's something that going through the journey with Cumberland and Westmorland was a key focus and a key part of that success. We recently bumped into each other at the Local Government Association conference down in Bournemouth, Paul and I, and we was reminiscing on the challenging project that it was. And one of the things I remarked on was really it was a risk-based approach in terms of the system. But what was more encouraging for me is early engagement, and that was absolutely key for continuity of service and safety for the citizen.
Paul, as the client, responsible for all of this, what's the lived experience perspective you can give us?
Yeah, some similar messages here, Roy. For me, being tasked with leading the ICT work stream was one of the toughest things I've ever done in my career. I was highly involved in COVID. I set up multiple strands of the national test programme in schools. But with integrity, I say that LGR was more difficult than that. Obviously, set different contexts, but on a really tight timeline, LGR was by far the most challenging thing I've ever delivered in my career. And I was asked to lead the ICT workstream, which is arguably one of the most complex. One of the earlier risks, and Mark mentioned the word risk, and obviously System C managed risks, but I had some risks to manage in the programme. And I'll never forget going back to the strategic risk register for the programme, and top and centre of that was making sure that we had business continuity. But underneath that, there were credible risks about losing records of some of the most vulnerable and the consequences of what that would be. And, we're not exaggerating by saying if we didn't get this right, then people's lives are significantly impacted, and there could be some legal ramifications of that, some real professional ramifications of that, and some real commercial ramifications of that. So we had absolutely no choice but to get this right, which is why when them strategic risk registers, at my end anyway, in the early stages were glowing red, some of the highest numbers I've ever had to manage, I needed to take a different approach to that strategic risk management, because anyone that's involved in strategic risk, you need to understand what the core determinations are. You need to then put mitigations in place. And looking back at that risk register now, it was all about making sure that we built those relationships. We already had a contractual relationship with System C. I was nowhere near that. I didn't need to be anywhere near that. I'd never met Mark. But early in that relationship, I knew that it couldn't just be a client contract relationship. It needed to be much more than that. This was different. System C openly told us we haven't built our system to separate it into two new ones. That wasn't how it was designed. But that first conversation that Mark and I had, we built an agreement that this needed to be a different relationship. It needed to be a partnership relationship. And yes, we still had our client relationships with the team and the contract managers and the project managers, and they did brilliantly. And I have to say, Mark and I are sharing our journey today, but it's the colleagues that worked for us in our teams that were the real heroes that made this happen. They worked relentlessly to make it happen. But we needed to make sure that for both adults and children's, we managed those risks, and there was some new things along the way, and we could plan for some of them, but we couldn't plan for them all. So Mark, you'll remember when we got closer to vesting day, the two shadow authorities, which some councils are just about to get to now, we live in a democracy, and the professional direction of Cumberland and Westmorland were slightly different. Elected members wanted a different charging policy for some of the system that's called Controc. And Controc was only built to have one variable in there. You could only put one number in there, and we needed two. So there was no doubt that we needed to split the system as a high priority in all of the 217 systems that were on my work programme. So for a number of reasons, adults and children's social care came right to the top of my list. I had statutory directors of adults and children's social care regularly on the phone to me saying, what's the plan? When's it going to be delivered? And when can I get my system separated? There was a lot of pressure coming my way. And I'm sure later on in the programme, we'll talk about some of that. The second thing I would say is the scale of the ICT and digital change required. Every single service relies on it. If you get an outage for more than a few minutes, understandably, practitioners, social workers, and everyone using the system, they can't do their jobs. And not only is that problematic in the moment, backlogs occur, stress gets higher, etc., etc. So that continuity of service throughout all of this was absolutely paramount. We could not lose the system. We certainly couldn't lose any records, but any downtime needed to be carefully managed. And we had brilliant colleagues from both our side and System C side when we planned this in terms of the test phase, and we had to do more testing than what we'd first envisaged, because we were coming up with some problems and we had to go around the test loop a few times, but we had to make sure this was right. And then the third thing I would say is the human element. Certainly from our side in local government, this is the most complex and probably anxious thing that colleagues will go through. People devote their lives to public service, that been in the teams that built these products. And the council's workforce is the greatest asset, but it brings uncertainty. It brings capacity stretches. They're doing the day job every day as you would, but we're doing this major change programme, and there's only so many colleagues that are really skilled in the product, and they really owned it. So their personal and professional commitment, we needed to manage really carefully, because they were so committed. I was really worried, Roy, that we were going to burn these people out. They were the single points of expertise, but potentially the single points of failure as well. So looking after them as human beings, making them feel valued, making them co-produce the solutions, be involved in the plan was really important. And then that links back to how that partnership worked, because we all had project plans. I remember Mark and James and the team coming with a project plan for us, and it had a Gantt chart, and then ours had a Gantt chart, and it was like, there's not much slippage in there. And things come up where you have to move things around. They just don't go to plan. And we built some contingency, as any good PMO would, but there was things came up. People would go on holiday. Somebody was off sick. You know, the data analyst wouldn't be available. You have to flex, and that's where that partnership came in. Because if we'd been rigorous in a contract environment, Mark and I wouldn't have been able to do that flex, and we had to get that back on track. And we became on text terms. We became, regular, almost daily updates. But what I would say is, we need to make sure that you look after the human element in both sets of teams. Certainly in Cumbria County Council, we had one instance of the product and we needed to move them to two. But we had a system support team that was then, when we got two, they were starting to look after two products. So we had to build that capacity so they were looking after two, because Cumberland's journey started to go to a different way of Westmorland's Furness journey. And that takes some time. So the big bit for me is remember the human element, not just the technology element in space.
I'd agree, and just on that, right? I think a key thing there in what Paul's describing is, the expertise in the practitioner, their passion, and that does drive success. But perhaps what wasn't really understood at the start of the journey is the level of pressure and professional pride that drives the individual. So we're embarking on a national change. We keep saying it, once in a generation. These people are absolutely key for it being successful, but if we don't give them the road to deliver this, the challenges that they face every day, which are equally as stressful, manifest themselves 2, 3, 4 times over. And that's something to be really mindful of when you're thinking about your journey. It's how do you engage? How do you plan for this? Whatever you plan, I will give one guarantee: you won't stick to the plan. There will be deviations, and we'll need to work with you to come through that. Some people will be more comfortable. We will have scenarios where practitioners won't be clear on their future, what organization they're going to move into, or if they will be moving into an organization. So all of these added layers of the sort of the human element become really important. And the only way to, alongside the support which Paul talks about, but the only way to really minimize that or reduce that known risk is to create time and really plan effectively. So that would be my one ask as we think about this.
I mean, I think the passion and conviction is unequivocal from you two. The way you're talking about the projects, but the people and the people that are delivering the projects, you're talking about the pitfalls, the areas where you're going to need slippage, the way that you're going to need to change the plan. The plan's going to have to evolve as you're rolling out is clear. And that started actually at the very beginning when Paul was speaking, and he said when you and him, you'd not met each other before, but you had to sit down and you had to decide on how you was going to work differently. And it strikes me that, you know, there was probably multiple opportunities along the project where you had to sit down and think about how you're going to do things differently. So Paul, to you and to Mark, you know, when you initially sat down, you looked at each other across the table and said, this is a huge project. We need to approach this differently. How did you walk out of that meeting with a clear plan of action that give you something which was different, tangible, but workable, rather than the same old plan?
I think from my perspective, certainly it started with those operating principles and that team agreement, because this was a foggy project. These guys were first. There was a clear objective, how we were going to achieve it. We stated from the beginning, we've not done this before. Yeah. We have the brain power, we have the ability, and we certainly have the system to do it. But as Paul said, it wasn't architected to be split. So this is something we need to look at. We'd obviously gone through that. We'd had a high level of design and approach, and we were confident that that was something we absolutely could deliver. But it wasn't like a typical new deployment where I know I could quote every step of the way. We know how it's going to work. We know the data migration is going to work, everything. So it was very much about the team in agreement. It was very much about focusing on, these are the objectives. This is what we do know. These are the certainties. These are the uncertainties. This is how we're going to deal with this. And this is how we're going to manage risk. And risk management is key, because as everyone goes through this journey, it's about looking at the risk to get to vesting, protect the information, protect the citizen, and protect the practitioners that are delivering that service. That underpinned every decision we made. And we was at a point where we talk about the finance element of the system. The organisations, as they developed and moved away, they had different charging policies. Yeah. And so within those policies, we had to make sure that we couldn't leave it in one system and wait till afterwards, because they were now different policies. So we split that and we moved it. But there were some challenges with some performance. And when we looked at it and understood it, it was about, actually, we need to platform this in a single environment. So we need to get this in on the cloud. So let's move this to the cloud so we can take out the external factors that are causing us as a collective a challenge here to take it forward. And that was a big step for the organisation, because that wasn't in the scope initially. The initial scope was to deliver it on premise as it was, but split it. Wow. And what was clear is that we needed to move it into that environment so that we could make sure we could optimise. And that was, again, about risk. It was understanding what needed to happen, the logic behind it. And again, we drove that conversation and we moved it to a successful outcome. So it's having that opportunity to have that conversation at every level. That could have been seen as a conversation from Paul, Mark's just trying to get it in the cloud because he wants to charge me more money. Yeah. This is the problem. This is where we are. We need to. And, you know, in that far in the journey, we'd built quite a healthy respect in terms of we're trying to take this forward. There is a collective objective here. Let's talk about the challenge. Let's move it forward together, and this is the right thing to do, and that was important.
Yeah, I mean, that open conversation, though, that Paul touched on that before. You know, you got to the point where you're texting each other. I imagine you're texting and WhatsApping out of work. You've had an idea. You've been thinking about something your teams mentioned earlier in the day, and it doesn't become a piece of work that you're delivering for cost. It becomes a piece of work that you really care about because you understand what's at stake. You won not just from the citizens that you're delivering it for and the practitioners, but also as well for the teams that are delivering the projects on both sides, client and customer. How do you manage? How did you bring those teams along with you? And I suppose this is more of a question for yourself, Paul, because I'm really interested from the customer's perspective. There's a lot there to keep you awake at night, and you're leading the project, and you're working with Mark, and you're putting processes and procedures in place to manage risk. You're understanding the risk. How do you instill that same level of confidence to the rest of the team that are working at the organisation, for them to come into work as confidently as you two every day and just deliver?
Yeah, so I was very blessed in the county council that we have some amazing teams anyway, and I was the assistant director for ICT, but then I was the LGR 7, as I called it, across all of the ICT work stream. So I already had that good knowledge of the team, and they were fantastic, whether that be from the ICT and infrastructure that were looking at the network and the on-premise, to the people in the support team that were very, very skilled and knew this product inside out. For me, I'm just going to go back a little bit, because in the relationship bit, as we left that virtual room of the agreement of how it was going to work, I'll be really clear, there was some red line issues for me. So yes, we had to work in partnership. Yes, we had to get some level of flex and negotiation, but unequivocally, there were some red line issues for me. I was not going to lose a single record. I needed 100% assurance that no record was going to get lost. That was a red line issue for me. I'm the statutory senior information risk owner, a statutory position for the council that I held personally and had personal accountability. So that data security, the robustness, and the cyber issue, we can't forget cyber attacks. Unfortunately, we live in a world at the moment where local authorities are targets for cyber attacks, especially with all the international conflict. In Barrow and Furness, it's well known that that's the home of the nuclear submarines. So there was lots of interest in Cumbria for very various reasons. So cybersecurity was an absolute red line for me. Not losing a single data record was a red line for me, and making sure that was business continuity of the system. So when Mark talks about some of them on premise, Mark and I didn't make that decision of moving into the cloud overnight. I think the teams worked for a number of weeks to try and resolve some of these data latency. And I'm not a technologist by background, but as a senior leader, you need to get to know what the real root cause issues are. And I was assured by my team that all the data logs in our end were showing A-OK. Mark was assuring me that the data logs in System C's were OK. But in simple terms, when the data was touching together, because we were changing so much, them tiny bits of data latency were basically making it so hard to get into the system. The practitioners just weren't being able to do their job as effectively. So, it almost became a no-go decision, because we were trying to resolve this for a number of weeks. It wasn't like a couple of days and we gave up and I just said, right, let's move it to the cloud. And from my perspective, that needed some financial investment. So I had to go through our governance and systems, because there was an investment to that. There was a change cost to that. There was a future state in terms of our enterprise architecture that was associated with that. So these are quite big decisions that we needed to take back through our governance framework. So, I needed that assurance from my technical guys that this was the right way to do it. I always had to go back to that risk log that I said right at the beginning, because, continuity of the system, the practitioners being able to get in, avoiding those backlogs, all of those risks, them scores start to go up because we couldn't get into the system in the way that we wanted it. And, reputationally, I can't speak for Mark, but Mark and System C, I remember Mark, we got to a no-go point at one point, and I was under pressure from my colleagues of, it might not be perfect, Paul, but let's just go with it and we'll fix going forward. And I was saying, from a CSIRO perspective, absolutely not. If you want to take that decision as a director of adult or a director of children's social care, I'll write you the decision record, but it's you that signed it, not me. Because that crossed a line for me, because I couldn't look everyone in the eye and be assured from a CSIRO perspective that everything was A-OK. So it took us a little bit longer. We didn't get this done for vesting day, and I make no apology for that, because I was on a right, not rushed perspective, and not everything was perfect at the end, but there was some red lines that I simply would not allow not to be met. And I'll never forget one of them conversations. Again, it was after work, Mark, and I'd said, look, I'm just not comfortable with this in terms of the go no go. And Mark, I recall you saying very openly, neither am I, because my brand is at stake here as much as this project.
Yeah.
So we agreed we needed a little bit more time, and that took another change. It needed another round of testing, and I need to look after the team for that, because some of my team were doing testing late at night on weekends, because sometimes you had to take the system down for a little bit to do the tests, and you needed it outside of practitioner time. So that, again, that human element coming in, that commitment of people logging in late at night and weekends to do another round of testing was really important to keep that team morale going. But I think the key thing here that I'm getting a point in this bit is there are some rules. There's freedom and flexibility in a framework, but there's some rules that you need to hold firm to, and making sure that them high standards are met, both from our side and the supplier's side. Sometimes there's no giving those. Sometimes there's a bit of flexibility, but in others, I was really, really clear. There were some red lines I wasn't going to cross.
But that's about good, effective leadership, Roy, and I think that's the key thing there. It's you've got to. We're always under pressure to deliver on time. We're always under pressure to make sure it's there, and that point of it's good enough, we'll fix forward. As I describe it, this was a foggy project. You don't want to be, and it takes strong leadership to do that. And equally, it's about protecting the practitioners. It's about these people have worked tirelessly to get it right, and they care. That's the thing that's really important. It's about caring, and they care about having success, whether it be delivering it to the citizen, whether it be pride in what they've delivered. And pretty much 50% of my team have come, if not more, have a local government background. So they've worked in local authorities. They know what it's like to be involved with that. I always describe our organisation is made up of a number of local government practitioners that are technology experts. They're not just software guys. And it is a different way of thinking about it.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that comes across. One of the things that you said, or what Paul said that you'd said, was, you're not comfortable with that decision either, because, that impacts your brand. And I guess for someone at your level within a commercial organisation to stand shoulder to shoulder with the customer and to say, I agree, I'm not comfortable either, means that there's going to be inevitable change to the scope, causing creep, which there's going to be a cost burden. And reading between the lines, I imagine there's, to a point, System C have absorbed some of that cost burden there in the creep to the scope, because you just felt it was the right thing to do, which a lot of software companies or a lot of tech companies wouldn't do. It'd just be, it's a change, it's out of scope, here's the cost, do you want to proceed from here or not? Well, what makes System C different in that regard, other than the fact that you've got a lot of people from local government who really clearly care and understand?
Yeah, I mean, look, well, I'm not going to pretend we're not a commercial organisation that's focused on delivering to our budget, our objectives, and making a commercially viable business. Of course we are. The level of investment that we plough back into the business and into the sector can only be achieved by that profitability, obviously. But it's also one of the core principles of our organisation, something our chief exec has talked about from the first day that I joined the business, and that's about doing the right thing.
Yeah.
And in terms of that, that's really important. The people we serve, our business focuses on social care and healthcare. We are servicing national infrastructure. We know that. We understand that as a business, and it's about doing the right thing, and it's about having those open and honest conversations about what we can do, what we can't do. And sometimes there's some levers that you can pull to support perhaps a constraint commercially. Other times there aren't, but building the right relationship, building the openness around that, and having that conversation allows you to navigate. And especially in this project that we're talking about here, it certainly paid dividends in the success of the objective, which was was great.
Certainly sounds like it from the way that you've both been talking about you respective parts of the projects. So that planning ahead then, for local authority leaders who are currently planning for LGR, what technology considerations should they be prioritising now to avoid costly challenges further down the line? Paul, can you lead with that, please, from your direct experiences?
Yeah, what I would say as well is there's so much at stake here. It's not just the project logs. and it's not just the rag statuses that you'll get from any good project managers, and I had brilliant ones that were working for me, so I was getting assurance reports, etc. What I wanted, both from a professional ICT work stream, but also from CSIRO, I wanted independent assurance that we'd done everything right. So once we'd eventually got the go live, I commissioned proactively an internal audit from the work to do an independent check through trained and regulated auditors to check the system and check everything was there. And that came back as a very positive audit opinion that was obviously done under independent audit. Interestingly as well, I worked for Cumbria County Council for over a decade, and our children's social services, for example, got the Ofsted rating of requires improvement for 10 years. And that was very difficult for everyone concerned in Cumbria County Council. But just over a year after vesting day, the Ofsted did an unannounced inspection of Westmorland, Furness and Cumberland Children's Services, and both came out at an improved good rating and was very positive in the way that the system and the integrity of the system and all the records were informing that brilliant practice. Clearly the leadership of the two services, clearly all the practitioners contributed to that, but there was some narrative in there about system integrity and the, you know, the data and all of those things that's really important. So they're two independently assured outcomes that for me go far and beyond the project plans that my team and Mark's team were respectively doing. In terms of going forward, what I would say, and I'm advising and supporting a number of LGR programs at the moment, the scale of the ICT change is absolutely enormous. We're spending half an hour or so today talking about the System C element. With respect, that's one system, one product in one ICT work stream of over 217. Then you've got multiple work streams and then the whole program. So, you know, we're having a debate today just about one element, a very important element. But if you scale that up, you can easily get distracted. So, and Mark mentioned earlier, I would absolutely reiterate, the scale of the ICT change is so enormous. Plan early, secure your required resources. I needed human resources and I needed financial resources. So I was going to program board and chief executives asking for that investment. I wasn't doing that frivolously, but I know that change needed some investment. I needed extra resources, both financial and human. My leadership style is one of collaboration and working in partnership, as we've said, but you do need to make sure that you're flexible and adaptable. There is changes along the way. So I would make sure that that's built into your mindset. The second point I would make is that technology changes are very, very fragile. A tiny change in one piece of your configuration can just knock things off track totally innocently, totally unintentionally. And I recall, Mark, one of the conversations we had when we came up with some problems was, System C was saying, we've never seen this before. And I was thinking, well, how's that? And then when we got down into root cause, and one for going into trying to find what the root cause is, Cumbria County Council, in all good intentions, had commissioned variations from the core product. We'd almost tweaked our ride, so to speak, and would almost change the product a little bit over a number of years. So actually, when we were trying to disaggregate, this was almost a semi-customized version that Cumbria had for all the right reasons. Over time, we'd needed this module tweaking or this report tweaking or whatever it was. But then when we were actually disaggregating it, it wasn't the core product that we were changing. We were changing a variation from it. So, you know, going forward and in hindsight now, if we'd had the core build, would that have been easier? Question mark. Had we been right up to date with all of our upgrades and the latest versions? Question mark. Would that have been easier? Now, nobody can tell me or advise of that, but going forward, trying to keep it as uniformed as possible can only help. I benefited from being one of one in the country. We were working with System C on this very complex project, very high profile, but we were one of one. And, you know, Mark, if you and I were texting, I do worry going forward for UK PLC. You know, I'm working with Surrey colleagues at the moment. Surrey are going next in 2028, but then you've got this whole in 2027, sorry. But then you've got this whole program just announced by the Secretary of State for 2028, and they're all at the same timescales with the 1st of April 28 vesting day. That's going to take some national leadership to make sure that this can all be done at the same time. Because Mark can't be having texts off 14 different me's going forward. So it needs to be uniformed. And I do have some genuine worries about how the whole sector, unless you act early, unless you engage the early of what your requirements are going to be, because Mark's going to have to scale up and the program's going to have to scale up.
Yeah.
But having that all in the same program is a major issue, as we say, for the most vulnerable. So making sure that that's as uniformed as possible within a model. Mark and I have talked afterwards, and the journey that we worked through together in Cumbria, Mark and the team have invested heavily in trying to get solutions that can then roll out at scale. But colleagues do need to make decisions. And when I'm advising colleagues around the country at the moment, whether they decide to invest or otherwise, that's up to them. But what I am saying is make your decisions as soon as possible, secure your resources, be very clear on your path, build some flexibility in, but make sure you do it as soon as possible, because April 28 will be upon you before you know it.
Yeah. So that's an interesting point that you make, though, and I was going to ask the question. Something like this, if it's being delivered at local or regional level, and you say, really, if we're looking at scaling up and we're looking to bring the vesting date, was it to 2028? Why hasn't a national approach, do you think, been adopted earlier, so that those core systems can be built and be the same for everybody, rather than different regions deciding on different ways of working, which maybe then causes fragmentation across the country? Certainly when you cross-referencing information between social services and the NHS, for instance.
Well, I can maybe start on that. I have regular conversations with some brilliant former chief executives that are now the national advisors in John Metcalfe and others, and this is known in central government about the scale of the challenge, and all of the advice is plan early, look at the things that's going to take your longest lead in time, and do everything that Mark and I are saying in terms of securing your resources, etc. We have to be mindful and respectful that we've got procurement regulations to adhere to under the Procurement Act. We do open competition. System C was the chosen supplier for the Cumbria programme. But there are others out in the marketplace, so we have to be mindful that the other regulations and laws are still there. In terms of some of the risks, they are identified. So there are, the learning from the Cumbria programme, from the North Yorkshire programme, from Northampton, and all of those are feeding into those very talented former chief executives who are the national advisors, and they're linking back into Whitehall and into ministers. So they are known. And there's a lot of advice being given now from Soccer Term and the LGA. So there are a lot of tools and techniques and playbooks and other resource tools that are there to help, built from our learning and that of others. So hopefully others can tap into that.
Yeah, I do. Sorry, Roy. I do think there's opportunity as well. The government have ring-fenced. Funding that's being made available to local authorities, a component of that is ring fence for social care, LGR. And, there's certainly a conversation that I would welcome around how can some of that funding be allocated directly to help support some of the tooling that's required to support this. Because as Paul's alluded to, he was the first. It was an army of people working with him. We've talked about the principle of a foggy project, and obviously there's been lots of learnings from that, and we've developed a methodology and approach around that. But what we've also done is been really informed about the tooling and technology that we can build and have built that can help with the transformation and help with either the split or the aggregation, and investing in that development. Again, is quite key. That will help UK PLC, will help them to mitigate risk and manage their approach, and give them that time to support the practitioners, give them the time to, do those extra rounds of testing and UAT and everything that needs to be in there. So, tooling investment has been something that's really important, and I think from a government perspective, thinking about that with the key suppliers in the industry, within the sector, would be absolutely helpful to the overall change. And the market is well defined, and it's a matter of having a few conversations with strategic suppliers. But that's certainly an area where, in my view, the government could support local authorities in more detail. I mean, the configuration side of it is historic over the last 10, 20 years as we've developed. And of course, you get nuances on interpretation of policy and how things work. But equally, there is a consistent and constant around the systems that are used across the piece and how we do that segregation and how we treat that data. Fundamentally, it's about protecting it, as Paul said, making sure we're absolutely certain that no one can be lost and we're tracking those vulnerable people properly. And the use of technology in the learnings from Cumberland and Westmorland can only benefit the next year ahead and then the following year. So that's where the government could really provide some support into local authorities, in my view.
Okay. So, I mean, I might be oversimplifying this. I'm not an IT expert, but given everything that you've just talked about so far, everything that you've learned, the advice that you've just been given there, and the different places where, local government can go for advice around LGR, would it be fair to say that System C are almost at the point where they have an out-of-the-box solution now, which would make it easier and faster for other regions or the local authorities?
I think to simplify it to that, Roy, would probably be misleading, if I'm brutally honest with you. I'd love to be able to say yes.
Yeah.
We've been through the journey with Paul and his team, obviously. So having that practical experience of that 2-year program has meant we can shape a very clear methodology and approach and tooling to support a split, a merger, and we've got the battle scars. I think that's something that absolutely we have got. And I think in taking that with the team and the expertise in the team, the next project is not a foggy project, because we understand the pitfalls, we understand what's going on, we've got the scenarios, and we can help inform and plan for that, and we can use the technology to support that in a more robust way, which will enhance the experience and reduce the risk. And so that is absolutely there, without a doubt.
Let's talk about avoiding distraction from service delivery. As we draw to a close, many councils, they're concerned that LGR could become a distraction from day-to-day service delivery. How can technology help councils maintain performance whilst managing such significant organisational change? Who wants to kick off with that one?
Well, I think it's kind of the thread of what we've talked about. It starts very clearly with understanding the system, having the system priorities. This is about maintaining the integrity of the data, keeping it solid, being confident that it's available, it's tracked, we can understand it's gone from A to B or it's come from C into A, and having that really clear view from a partner that understands that. LGR doesn't mean there's not vulnerable children that need to be looked after, need to be assessed. It doesn't mean that vulnerable adults don't need to still have their care packages assessed and all the services that are delivered within that. The day-to-day from a social worker's perspective will be, this is a distraction for me. I've got my citizens that I need to look after. I've got my caseload that I need to work through. Don't put barriers in the way of me managing my caseload. So that means a reliable, stable system that continues to be there to support them in their role so they can execute their duties effectively. So our role in this is very much to take away the technology distraction. Of course we need to engage with them. Of course the wider program of splitting organisations, where they're going to sit in the future, geographical boundaries, what does it mean if dad's going to be in one boundary and mum's going to be in another, and little Johnny goes to school in a third? How does that work if there's SEND provision that needs there, or there's school transport that needs to be there? All of these practical things that will become real practical challenges that the social cares, the social workers need to work through and need to work with the families and with the citizens to get right. That's going to increase anyway. It's our job to make sure the system remains secure, it remains functional, and it can still deliver what they need. So that's where we're going to really focus on, letting them deal with the big task of the organisational change, not the technology change.
Yeah, and Roy, from my perspective, we've talked about the sort of non-project elements of this that are so important, the people, all of those relationships, the partnerships. But for this bit, this is where that program rigor absolutely comes in and the program governance comes in.
Yeah.
So in my world, I talk about swim lanes. So swim lane 1 is business as usual, not business as unusual, because the practitioners on the existing system that's now procured, stable and contracted, they need access to that unequivocally without any distractions. So that's the swim lane of business as usual. And let's not forget that technology platforms aren't perfect. So you'll take LGR out of it, take any change project out of it, you're going to have some problems along the way that might need resolving. That's got nothing to do with LGR, it's got nothing to do with change, but these things come up and sometimes you have to resolve them. So swim lane 1 was business as usual, and that was business as usual, did not fail, both from our relationship from a tech point of view, from the practitioners, and making sure that got delivered. In swim lane 2, that was the sort of change program for LGR. And we put different people on that. We put really at the heart of that were our technology team and our system support team. Later on, we needed to get practitioners ready to do the UAT testing. Of course we did. And actually, that's something that I would say, planning in early for adults and children's social care directors, knowing where in the critical path you're going to need your real frontline practitioners to do that real testing, that real user assurance testing, because your system support team can do it, and ours did it very, very well. But we needed to bring the new practitioners on, and they needed to trust the product. They were the ones that were given their directors, who are the statutory officers responsible. Yes, this looks okay. It feels okay. It doesn't look different. It doesn't feel different. And sometimes you have to put what I call workarounds in. So there was a period of time where we had to have one system for Cumbria that had a banner on for Westmorland and Furness caseload and Cumberland, because we were 2 new unitary authorities under statute from the 1st of April 2023, but we hadn't split the product. Finally, we were in the project, we were partway through it, but for all the reasons I've said earlier, getting it right, not rushed, where there was a period where we had one system that was servicing both. That means that you need data sharing agreements, you need to cover in legislation the practitioners that they weren't looking at records, that they shouldn't be. We needed to engage with the Information Commissioner's Office. There was lots around that from that data and intelligent governance that really a good project and programme will pick up. And there's lots of variables in that. It's not just the technology. We have statutory responsibilities for data protection. And remember, by then, after April the 1st, we're 2 total different legal entities. So we had to work through all of that and have a practical, solution to it, but which was lawful. One of the key principles of local government reorganisation that we hear around the country is safe and legal. And that's what I mean by that. It's safe that all the records are there, but it's legal as well. I didn't want to be in a court of law as data protection officer to say, why is somebody in Cumberland looking at records of somebody in Westmorland and Furness, because there's no legal duty for them to do it. So we had to cover all of those things off. And that's where the good, rigorous project plan comes in that ticks all of those boxes and brings that assurance in.
Yeah, I was going to ask, it's such a huge project, so many moving parts. How did you sleep at night? But you've just answered the question. Rigorous planning. There was a lot of unnegotiables, things that just mustn't happen under any circumstances. And you've clearly held yourselves to account on delivering all of those unnegotiables as well. And I think for the people listening to this podcast, it's a really valuable conversation, because first to have done it, you've done it with great passion and vigor. But you've talked really candidly about, the difficult conversations that you've had to have, the way that you've brought the team along through collaboration, and you've made it, you've tried to make it as frictionless as you possibly can for the users, for the benefactors of the system, whether that be the citizen, the practitioners, and the people at local authority and service delivery level. And I think that's crucial, especially as the rest of the country is embarking on this journey. There's a lot of unknowns for those organisations moving into LGR, but there's 2 people and more bigger teams that can help answer a lot of those questions. And we'll make sure that we put all your contact details in the show notes, so people know how to contact you, because it strikes me that if they was to send you an email or drop you a DM on LinkedIn, you'd happily spend 20 minutes, even an hour, having a conversation with them and helping them out. But what's the one thing each of you would like listeners to take away from this podcast. Mark, start with you first.
It's sooner than you think. Plan early, and set out your non-negotiables, your principles for working. And as Paul said, focus on the first and foremost, safe and legal, keep the lights on. That's got to come first as we go on this journey.
For me, Roy, the biggest I would take away, there's a model, John Adair, of person-centered leadership. If anyone wants to look it up, and it's 3 concentric circles. It'll be easy to focus, and it's got 3 circles of task, team, and individual. It'll be easy to focus on the task and look at them project logs and risk logs and all of those things, and they are important. But for me, this was a success because we invested in the individuals. They built a strong team, both in our own councils, with System C. They built a strong team, and then we worked collectively as a team. And there were challenges along the way. I'm not going to sit here and say it was all plain sailing, because it wasn't, and we had to overcome some barriers. But what I would say is invest in the individuals, look after them. And you asked something there about how I slept at night, and there were some. I certainly slept, but I would wake up every now and again. But for me, because I knew that I had invested in those individuals, if they said to me that they were going to deliver something, I trusted them. I really empowered them. We put the best people with their skills and knowledge. I was not the one to solve some of them technology challenges. I empowered the teams to go and come back and give me professional advice, and take that advice and take that insight, because they are so good at what they do. So making sure that you trust your teams, put them on, empower them, give that leadership. You have to be there to guide them and steer them and be accountable. Ultimately, I would be accountable, but I brought them along, and they were the ones that deliver it. So if they are watching this afterwards, a huge thank you to each and every one of them, because they are the success stories about that. It's certainly not me here privileged to share that story. It's them that should be the ones that are getting that national praise, because they were simply amazing in this project.
Here. And isn't it funny, the more you trust people, the more they tend to care about the thing that they're doing for you and for everybody else. It's very simple, but definitely true and effective. Mark, Paul, it's been a pleasure speaking with you. Really insightful for me. I know a lot more now than I did at the beginning of this podcast, and our watchers and listeners will definitely learn a lot from that as well. Thanks, guys. I look forward to speaking to you again soon. Take care.
Cheers, Roy. Thank you.
Bye. Thanks, Roy.